Eagles Entertainment.
Eagle Eye in the Sky is fueled by Gatorade, the official sports drink of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Anything that move, I don't care who it is. Let's go. Give me everything you got. Play fast, play hard. Let's meet these boys tonight in their house. It's party time. It's party time. There we go. Touchdown!
You are listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right, another week, and we've got a big road win to break down as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and as always, I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 362. At the top of today's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I chat with Greg Cosell from NFL Films as we take a look at this team's win over the Carolina Panthers before getting into the quick turnaround against Tom Brady and the defending Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Bucks on Thursday Night Football. Before we get there, just a couple quick things I want to make sure we hit on. Number one, make sure you jump on to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. If you've got a question, we will answer it here on the show. We've got a couple that we will hit on here this week and one good one here at the end of today's episode. As always, make sure you go check out the All 22 review, which has got all of my All 22 analysis, video clips, all my big takeaways from the game. That should be up by the time you listen to this podcast, whether it's on PhiladelphiaEagles.com or on the Eagles YouTube page, as well as go check out my post-snap read, where I focused in on the Eagles defense in all three levels, guys making plays along the defensive line, at linebacker, and at secondary in the win over Carolina. Also, right now, if the season ended today, the Eagles would have three top 10 picks in next year's draft. If you want to know who the top players are, make sure you are subscribed to the Journey to the Draft podcast. Myself, Dane Brugler, Ben Fennell, we were there talking about the big winners of a crazy weekend in college football. We're talking NFL draft twice weekly, every week, over on the Journey to the Draft podcast, wherever podcasts can be found. But let's get this podcast rolling. Excited to get to talking with Greg Cosell about the big win in Carolina. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
All right, time to dive into the tape now as I welcome in my friend Greg Cosell to talk about this Eagles win down in Carolina and preview next week's matchup, or really this week's matchup, just 4 days away, against the Tampa Bay Bucks. Greg, excited to get your thoughts here on an interesting game.
Well, Fran, I'm sure you knew, as I did, that they were going to win this game all along, right?
Yeah, of course. It's exactly how we drew it up.
Yeah, they were just teasing us for the first three quarters, and we just knew they were going to win the game in the fourth quarter. I had no doubts whatsoever.
No question. And look, it's one of those games that certainly in all three phases there are areas of improvement, and in all three phases you say, all right, well, there are some things you like, right? And that's those. You're going to need those kinds of wins. I said this in the postgame show last night after the game. No matter where you are looking at this Eagles team, big picture, if you're looking at that small, kind of small potatoes and say, all right, well, just looking here at 2021, I feel like they can compete for the division. I really feel like they can go out and compete for a wild card spot, whatever it is. Well, if that's the case, you need wins like this in your bag. You need wins like this in your resume. Or if you're saying, look, I'm not necessarily worried about the playoffs this year. I'm worried big picture. Well, these are one of those wins that as a new coaching staff, you can kind of refer back to and say, when things are down, fighting through adversity, all three levels, this is a team a game that a coaching staff can kind of build around. So I do think it's an important win from that standpoint. But I know after going through the film, the big takeaway for both you and I going separately, the defense was really, really impressive in this one. Yeah,
very impressive. And started with the front four. I thought they played really, really well as a unit. We can talk about individual players. I thought, Hargrave continued to have really good snaps. Cox had some good snaps. Sweat had some good snaps. I thought they did some good things with stunts. So it started with the front four. The other thing that really stood out to me was we saw less split safety coverage, more single high safety coverage. They did travel Slay on Moore when Moore lined up outside. That was something different as well. Now, they did that. They still did not play a high percentage or very much man coverage, but they at least traveled Slay, who obviously is seen by most as a matchup type corner, but at least they lined him up over Moore when Moore lined up outside. So that was definitely a change in the secondary with the Moore single high, but it all started for me anyway with the defensive line.
Yeah, The defensive line was outstanding. And I think obviously it starts on the interior with those two defensive tackles. When you look at Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave, both guys getting home for sacks in this game. But I thought this was kind of one of those interesting showcase games from a breakdown standpoint where it's like, okay, you can see not just each guy making plays in a one-on-one standpoint, but also how they complement each other, right? Because we saw cases where the offensive line slid the protection one way or the other, creating those one-on-ones. There was a play where Fletcher Cox gets inside and forces the quarterback off his spot, and Hargrave is able to kind of clean him up and flush him from the pocket, right? So you just saw those guys kind of working in concert. So just from a pure narrative standpoint, kind of interesting just looking at that just in a vacuum in this game.
No, and you're right, because the first sack, which came on 3rd and 4 in the second quarter by Hargrave, he beat the left guard Daly, but the offensive line slid away from Hargrave to Cox's side. Cox was kind of in a 4-eye technique alignment. And there was an example where they played cover 3 behind that 4-man D-line rush. So just to speak to your point, Hargrave gets the one-on-one against a converted college tackle in Daly, who's now been playing guard for the Panthers, and he just beats him, drives him right back into the pocket and gets the sack. I think the second sack was Sweat. It was 3rd and 10 in the high red zone, which was also in the second quarter. And that involved Cox as well, because it was an ET stunt. Cox was the outside looper on that, and he forced Darnold to step into Sweat. Sweat was the picker, meaning he went first and Cox looped around him. And what essentially happened was Cox forced Darnold to step up right into Sweat, who had driven back Christensen, the right tackle, into the pocket. So, Cox was a part of both of those, even though he did not get credit for the sack on either one.
No question. And what I like too about a lot of those third down sacks, you mentioned, one on 3rd and 4, there was a 3rd and 8, there was a bunch of 3rd and long plays. And that's something I feel like that gets a little bit under talked about, I guess, when it comes to this defense and some of the struggles they've had in the last couple of weeks leading into this game, right? Was that not only are we seeing when the offense is able to run the football, it's a lot of 3rd and short. I really do feel when you talk about, the fronts, there's not a lot of creativity. How are they creating these one-on-ones for Fletcher Cox or Hargrave or these DNs? Well, when it's 3rd and 2 or 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 3, you are far less likely to line up in anything exotic or try and create anything from a matchup standpoint, as opposed to what you would do if it's 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. And so the Eagles getting into more of these 3rd and long situations in this game allowed them to try and create more of those one-on-one matchups for sure as well.
Yeah, and what stood out to me was the stunts. There were multiple stunt concepts in this game. They almost had a 4th sack, as you know, on 3rd down late in the 3rd quarter. That was another ET stunt. Hargrave looped behind Barnett, and he had a clear path to Darnold. And that was the one where, Darnold just had to try to run away from Hargrave, and he got rid of the ball just as Hargrave got to him. So I thought the stunts really showed up in this game and were very effective against the Panthers O-line.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, if you play basketball, you understand, the basic pick and roll play, right? Well, it's so great against man-to-man defense. Well, same thing. The defensive line, once they get a beat on which way the offensive line is going to slide on any particular down, a lot of coaches will give the defensive tackles that ability to call a stunt up front, right? So the defensive tackle has a sense, all right, they're sliding away. We're on the man-to-man side of the protection. Well, now defensive end, let's run a stunt here. Let's run a game. And now you can see those guys kind of work off each other. I thought that was the case on that Josh Sweat sack.
And that's very possible. You could be right, because what happens is if they're going to slide away, the center is not in position to help on the stunt. So, again, I'm sure teams do that where they can call it on their own. So I can't speak to whether the stunts that worked in this game were
on that play
calls that came in from the sideline, or whether they did that on their own. But all I know is it seemed to me anyway that there were more stunt concepts in this game.
Last individual point on those D tackles. I think one of the things that we've seen from Javon Hargrave over these last few weeks, because he just continues to be so productive and win so many of these one-on-one battles, his understanding of how to attack the alignment of the guard that he's matched up with, I think is so strong. He's often lined up as a one technique. And if the guard's obviously outside him, if he's the one technique. So for our listeners, it can be a little bit tough without a visual aid. But if you imagine that, okay, the offensive line sliding away, you're matched up on an offensive lineman that is lined up outside of you. So that guy's got to step inside to get between him and the quarterback. He does a great job of stepping outside to make that offensive lineman kind of stutter a little bit and then knifing back inside. You know what I'm saying? So basically kind of setting up that offensive lineman.
Absolutely. And he's, people probably just think of bull rushes as just pure power, but there's a lot of hand placement involved and hand usage involved in those kinds of things, because it's very difficult just to push back a 310-pound man. So you need to do some things to get him off balance. I think Hargrave is very, very good at that.
Yeah, it's something I think we'll continue to see more from Milton Williams as well. He'll show some flashes of being able to do that as just a rookie third-round pick, continuing to develop that into his skill set. Defensive ends, you look at Josh Sweat and Derek Barnett. Look, the Panthers had a lot of issues at tackle last week. They were missing their starter, Cam Irving. Interesting that they decided to go that approach with moving Taylor Moton, who's been a career right tackle, going back to college at Western Michigan, moving him to left tackle, taking Brady Christensen, who has been a left tackle by trade, and moving him to right tackle. Both guys really struggled, and that allowed the defensive ends, who I know they didn't always show up in the sack column, just constantly in the lap of quarterback Sam Darnold.
Yeah, no, they struggled, and I think their O-line has been a little bit of an issue all season, the Panthers, that is, and making that change. Again, they obviously thought it was their best way to go, and they know their players better than we do. But clearly, both left tackle Moton and right tackle Christensen had issues in this game with the Eagles' defensive end. So, that was, as we said, this was a game for the D-line. And of course, the interceptions as well, because the Eagles had not really been a turnover team through the first 4 weeks of the season.
No, we saw, I feel like the benefit, it's funny. A lot of people say, like, more press coverage, more press coverages. Well, there's obviously there's pros and cons to everything, right? And when you look at one of the values of playing softer zone coverage, playing from depth, playing off coverage, is that you're able to see everything from snap to finish. You're able to read the quarterback from throw to catch point. And with on all three of these picks, the two by Darius Slay, the one by Steven Nelson, both coming in, or all three rather, coming in off zone coverage, where the corners were able to just read it and drive on the football and make a play.
Oh yeah, and the first one by Slay, that was the cover 2 side of the defense.
Quarter half. Yep.
Yeah, it was quarter half, and he played that really, really well, because when you're in cover 2 as a corner, obviously you have rules, but you sort of try to play between the flat route, because you're responsible for the flat, and any route kind of behind you in that outside void. And I thought he did that really, really well. I mean, he was in perfect position, made a great play. And then the second one, that was a little different, because that was a 5-man front, which the Eagles played a lot of in this game. Yeah. And it was always Avery who was the 5th player on the line of scrimmage. And they played 3 under, 3 deep behind it. And Slay, in that kind of defense, it becomes a matchup defense at some point. You've got to match up to your receiver. And Slay matched Moore's intermediate sit route. And Darnold put the ball outside, which to me was a poor throw, but that allowed the interception.
Yeah, no question.
And then the Nelson one was great, because he really sat on that. I mean, I thought that was quarter half as well.
Yeah, I thought so too. But this time over on the quarter side, he was playing in cover 4.
Yeah, he was a cover 4 corner, and I thought he did an outstanding job, Fran, because he never got out of his pedal. No, he never turned his body. And then he jumped to throw to Anderson on the out route. So to me, that was playing quarters coverage textbook. That was the way you would teach it. Don't get out of your pedal. Don't turn your body until you absolutely have to.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When your defensive line is winning at the level of the Eagles' defensive line was winning on Sunday, those corners, you feel a little bit more confident in jumping some of those routes, because the pressure's going to get home. That ball is going to come out hot.
The ball's going to come out.
Yeah, the ball's going to come out.
And Darnold, it was a game where Darnold, and I think this was a function of the Eagles' D-line. This was a game where Darnold was not comfortable in the pocket. He played a little fast. He hurried himself. His feet were not calm. I mean, they got him playing the way, most people think of Sam Darnold, right or wrong. That's the way people think of Sam Darnold. And the Eagles got him to play that way in this game.
Rotation of linebackers. The Eagles played essentially three different defensive packages. You saw relatively a big nickel, that 5-man front with 1 off-ball backer and 5 DBs. We saw the base defense with 3 backers, and then the regular nickel. between those four backers, so Alex Singleton, Eric Wilson, TJ Edwards, Davion Taylor, saw more Taylor than we've seen yet. Was there one guy in particular that kind of stood out to you most on film? I thought Taylor flashed a handful of times, and TJ Edwards, to me, really flashed in this game as well, playing downhill.
Yeah, I think that's what he is. I think Edwards is that kind of player. Obviously he doesn't get a ton of snaps. It depends on the opponent because he's not going to play in the nickel. And this team does not play dime, so he's not really going to play in the nickel. The nickel, if they're going to go with a 4D line nickel, then it's predominantly Singleton and Wilson. And Taylor could increasingly get some snaps in the 4-2 nickel, Fran. I think that they might be working toward that just because he's so athletic. In the 5-1 nickel, it seemed as if it was Singleton or Wilson as the stack backer. So I'm very curious to see where Davion Taylor goes because we know what he is athletically.
Yep.
We don't know. You may know. I'm not in the building, but we don't know where he stands mentally as far as picking up what he needs to pick up. But he is a superior athlete.
Yeah, and he made a play out the screen game where he was able to avoid a block. He made a play downhill at the point of attack. I thought was impressive, and even just kind of running around and hunting up crossers was active out there. So look. Is it all perfect with him? No, not yet. I'm just interested to see him get more reps, stay healthy, get more reps, and see what it looks like in this defense. Real quick, you mentioned something there, and I only want to ask you about this because it was brought up late last week. It was kind of talked about, here locally from a media standpoint. You mentioned the Eagles not necessarily a dime team defensively, one of a handful of teams that aren't really a dime defense. And when you look at the teams that haven't really been dime defenses, a lot of the zone heavy schemes. So, you look at the Buffaloes and the Indianapolises and you go down the list. What are some of the reasons why you think that would be the case? And is that, is that something that holds a defense back because they're not a 6 defensive back team? What do you think are the reasons behind why a team, if you're a heavy zone team, well, you're not going to necessarily play a lot of 6 DBs on the field?
That's a hard question to answer because, look, the team they're playing this week has played one snap a dime all year.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody's ripping I don't think anybody's ripping Todd Bowles and saying, what the hell are you doing? Right. So I don't know how to answer that. I think that could be a philosophy and it could be a function of personnel. Yeah. Because the Eagles have played poorly, it's easy to rip Jonathan Gannon.
No doubt.
And in fact, I did a show yesterday where I said, let's slow the roll a little bit. They've played 4 games.
Yep.
Jonathan Gannon is not trying to play bad defense, and the Eagles are not trying to lose games. So there's a reason that he's not playing dime. Okay, now he doesn't have to come out and state it philosophically and get into a big-time football conversation at his press conference. So we may never know the specific reason. He doesn't have to tell us that. But it ultimately comes down to philosophy and personnel. If you have a dime player, don't forget you need a player. Normally it's a safety. Normally, not always, it depends on the team, but very often it's a safety that's a dime player, and that requires a specific skill set. Now, if you play a team, let's say, that lines up a ton in 2x2 sets, you may feel very comfortable with a corner that is a dime player because you can line them up over one of the slots, just like your other corner. But that becomes a philosophy and it becomes a function of personnel. I'm not sure the Eagles have a safety right now on this roster who you could say would fit the role of a dime safety.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of it. But something certainly it was talked about a lot last week. And when you brought it up, I said, let me ask Greg his thoughts on the topic.
And again, I don't know the specific reason, but I do know that you can't automatically say because you don't play dime that you're not a good defense.
Oh, what are you doing? Yeah, right.
You can't automatically say because you don't use motion on 80% of your snaps that you're a bad offense. But a lot of these things get presented as absolutes, and they're not absolutes.
Right. No, it's certainly becoming that kind of topic of conversation, looking at that defensive package standpoint. Let's go over to the offensive side of the football where, look, most of this game, this team looked out of rhythm. They looked out of sync. They could not get things going in the run game. They could not get things going in the pass game. Obviously, it was more pass than run. A lot of screens early in this game. A lot of throws close to the line of scrimmage. That a week ago, you and I sat here and we praised the fact that the screen game was really, really effective. The Eagles have one of the best screen teams in the NFL. Now, last week, that was not the case. Nick Sirianni on Monday talked about how Carolina kind of changed their approach up a little bit. They weren't as aggressive up the field, and that kind of affected, how well the screens worked or didn't work in this one. But for whatever reason, and we can talk about all the, there's lots of different reasons. the pass game was just not functioning at a high level for the first 3 quarters and change in this game. So yeah, it was one of those tough watches for sure on Monday morning.
It was one of those games. There was no rhythmic feel. I thought the Panthers played a lot more man coverage in the first half than I would have anticipated. Yep. Although they've played more man this year, I think, than people think about the Panthers. Then in the third quarter with the lead, they started to play more zone, but they played a good amount of man coverage. They had snaps on third down in which they used Reddick as a spy. So it was just it was a game where they could not develop rhythm. And again, this is just a philosophical statement now. There are a lot of people who believe that if your offense is struggling, that the best way to gain some stability and continuity is to run the ball. But that's a philosophy. And obviously that's not the philosophy that Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen are taking right now. And that's okay. I mean, this is the way they're choosing to play. They're obviously choosing to play this way because they think it's the best way to play given who their quarterback is. Because most offenses play to their quarterback because you're trying to maximize his positives and minimize what you feel are his negatives. So this is the way the Eagles are playing right now. They've been in the shotgun more than any team in the NFL. And again, that's just a philosophy and a statement. That's not a right or a wrong. Because the team that's next is the Chiefs, and I think people would say their offense is probably pretty good. So that's a philosophy, And when your offense is playing well, people, it's just like we just spoke about the defense. Well, this past week, we're not going to get into a big discussion about nickel versus dime. The defense played really well. If the offense starts playing well, we're not going to get into a big discussion about running the football. You can win in this league playing a lot of different ways.
No question. And I think that, when you're talking about a quarterback making his 9th start in the NFL, Jalen had a great game last week, and the game this week, not as good. You're going to have some of those ups and downs when you're dealing with a young quarterback still trying to get comfortable in his own skin playing in the league. So, you're going to have games like this. Ultimately, good sign that they were able to kind of rebound. Good for Jalen for, fighting through adversity and coming through, made a great play late in the game. I know you saw the big one, the big one that really kind of opened the floodgates for them, essentially, was that 53-yarder.
Yeah, because it came right after.
What did you see on that play?
And it came right after the play where, they had to do the review to say that his arm was moving forward. So that sequence was a little scary because if that was ruled a touchdown,
the other way, no doubt.
The game's over at that point. They're not going to win that game. But to me, the 53-yarder, which came late in the third quarter to Watkins, that was the game changer. And they were in a 1-by-3 set, meaning the tight end Goddard. He was the boundary player there. He was the boundary X. And Watkins was number 3 to trips. Now, the Panthers, and they had done this before in the game, they used Reddick as a spy on Hurts. So their coverage was a zone coverage, what we call 3 under 3 deep. So they were missing one player in underneath coverage because Reddick was the spy. So to me, anyway, someone has to carry Watkins' vertical route because he ran a vertical route from the inside slot to trips. And it has to be one of the hook to curl defenders, either Carter, who was closest to Watkins, or Chin from the other side. But my guess is Chin didn't see Watkins as his responsibility because Watkins' release was outside of Carter. But what that did is it put Watkins screaming at the post safety Franklin, a Temple player, I believe.
Yes, it was. Yep.
Yeah. And you just, as a defense, you never want a 4-3-5 wide receiver screaming at your post safety. That's just a total mismatch. So he just obviously, and Watkins made a nice little stick move to the outside, which got Franklin turned around. And then he had all that space, which allowed Hurts, who had to throw it probably a hair sooner than he wanted to because the ET stunt was effective and Fox got in. He had to throw it a hair earlier, but because he had so much space, he could just lay it up. He didn't have to really worry about being super precise with where he put it because there was so much space. And he laid it out perfectly for the wide open Watkins. And that play changed the game.
How similar, you were talking about the communication in the Carolina secondary there. How similar was that to the play that Avonte Maddox made on the deep post route from Robbie Anderson down the field where, he's kind of that underneath zone defender in my mind. I don't know if you have any notes on the play, Greg, but he carries Anderson vertically where it looks like essentially like, oh, is he Was he playing? When I watched it on TV, I was like, oh, was Maddox playing as a 2-high safety? Were they in man coverage? No, like watching the film, like they were in zone, and he just carries Anderson vertically and stays with it. Obviously, makes an outstanding play on the ball down the field.
Yeah, I didn't make a note on that specific play, but the bottom line point is, first of all, that had to have been practiced during the week because the Eagles are going to line up in 1x3 sets, and you're going to spy because you practiced that all week.
Right.
So somebody made a mistake. If you're playing 3 under, 3 deep, someone has to carry the vertical by number 3. Yep. Someone. Now you could say, hey, it's a mismatch, even if it's Carter, the linebacker, but at least he's running with him.
Yeah.
Someone has to carry the vertical. Yep. It's just you can't let the vertical from number 3 in 3 under 3 deep coverage run free because then he's on the safety, and that's a problem. Normally, number 3 runs a little more of an angled, route across the field, which we've seen so many times in the NFL. And in this case, Watkins just released outside of the linebacker, not crossing his face. If he crossed his face, my guess is Chin would have had eyes on him and would have at least tried to run with him. But because he released outside of Carter, and maybe that was by design by the Eagles, Chin, who was the boundary hook to curl player, never even got eyes on him.
So the Eagles get points on that drive. Jalen Hurts sneaks it in on the goal line
1-yard touchdown,
for a touchdown. That was their first touchdown. After the punt block, TJ Edwards, great punt block, outstanding play where that's created by Sean Bradley. His getting off the ball. He ends up taking 2 blockers with him. Great angle by TJ Edwards playing off of Bradley's hip. Great technique and discipline at the block point, and he's able to get his hand on the football. Eagles get the ball in plus territory. Couple big plays, get them down where they're able to punch this one in for a touchdown as well, Greg. You get the Goddard 20-yard completion along the right seam, and then you've got Jalen Hurts on the touchdown run on the keeper. Thoughts there just on that drive and the ability to punch it in?
Well, the 20-yarder was the key play.
Yeah.
The 20-yarder to Goddard. I mean, they came out of 11, a 2x2 set. Goddard was the slot to the boundary. And the Panthers decided to blitz here. So they blitzed with an overload concept from the field. So it ended up being a 5-man rush, but an overload to the field side of the formation. And I'd love to know what you thought, Fran, because I looked at that play 25 times to try to figure out what the coverage was. It's a blitz coverage, but it struck me as being kind of like a 4 deep, 2 under kind of concept. I don't know what you thought it was.
I always struggle with some of those blitz coverages, but I did, especially because it was where it was on the field. I kind of felt it was a 4 deep, 2 under as well. But I wasn't 100% confident on that either.
But the bottom line point is that Burns, who's not used to doing that because he's more of a pass rusher, he cannot get beat inside by Goddard. He cannot, and he let Goddard run by him. And unless the deep safety there is going to really squeeze that hard, Goddard's going to be wide open, which he was, and it's pitch and catch, which it became. Yeah. So I can't believe that that's what they wanted the result to be from a Panthers perspective, because Goddard was wide open, and Hurts did have time. The blitz was picked up extremely well, no problem. Hurts had time, and he stuck it right on Goddard's hands with a beautiful throw. But again, if you're a Panthers fan, that play probably sticks in your craw, just like the Watkins 53-yarder does.
Yeah, a couple of big miscommunications in coverage, or just like poorly executed plays by that side of the football. Eagles, like I said, punch it in on the zone read keeper. Nobody scrapes over the top with Jalen Hurts. He runs in to the end zone. They can 2-point conversion soon afterwards. Jalen Hurts looked like it was some kind of a blown protection, Greg, where you had a free rusher coming off Jalen Hurts' right side. He makes that man miss and finds him in the back of the end zone. But one last thing. And this is, the Eagles now get the ball back after the Steven Nelson interception, trying to ice the victory. This is where Miles Sanders runs out of bounds a couple times. Got a little sloppy there from that standpoint. That said, the offensive approach I thought was interesting, Greg. That drive, the Eagles played a lot of tackle over with 2 tight ends tight to the formation on the opposite side.
You're right.
Run heavy look to the left and the pass heavy look to the right. And the Eagles ran the same play, ultimately, like a handful of times, going right down the field. They ran a lot of the stretch plays behind the tackles, and then they ran speed option a couple of times to the tight end side. I thought it was just interesting to see them go back to back there.
Yeah, and obviously the Sanders 18-yard run was a big run. And actually, so Dickerson, did he get hurt?
He did. Nick Sirianni said that he had an ankle injury, but should be good to go here moving into Thursday.
Because, I mean, I thought Herbig had a great block on the 18-yard run by Sanders.
Yep.
I mean, he had a really good block because that was a tough block because I believe it was Jones. Jones was outside of him. I think it was Jones. Jones was outside of him in a 3 technique alignment, and he was able to turn him and reach him, and that was an outstanding block. And then, of course, there was a really good block there. I think that was Dillard, who getting up to the linebacker level.
Dillard's really played well. He's building on multiple week over week.
Yeah, he's played really well at left tackle these last 3 weeks.
No question. I mean, that was the offense performance. Like I said, mostly, it was a little bit of a tough watch, but the Eagles, were able to come through and execute when it mattered most at the end of the game.
When you're trying to build a program and there's no look, what was the Eagles' record last year, Fran? 4-11-1, right?
11-1, yeah.
Okay, so they're in somewhat of a rebuilding phase. That's why you hire a new head coach, and that's why you do what you did. So when you're trying to, win games and build something, there's nothing wrong with an ugly win. There's nothing wrong with it. They count.
No, especially the first half of the year, you need as many of those as you can get because they're better than the loss. That's big when you get down into the final standings and things in December. Greg, let's spin this to Thursday. And obviously, the defending Super Bowl champs come to town. You got the well-defined systems on both sides of the football. This is a team that's beat up a little bit, but we'll start over on the other side. Since we're talking about Eagles offense, let's stay with that matchup and look at this Bucs defense. Todd Bowles, we know the identity, and it's going to start with pressure. He's going to bring a lot of heat. It's going to come from every angle. A lot of A-gap pressure stuff. We'll certainly see a lot of that with the speed that they've got at the second and third level coming right up the middle. Big challenge here for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure. Now, the one big deal, though, could be Levante David. We don't know what his status is. He's so critical, in my view, to that defense. And while Kevin Minter is a very solid pro, he just doesn't bring the same skill set that Levante David does. But that D-line is really, really good. I mean, we know about the starting 4. I don't know what you think, but I think Joe Tryon, who was their first round pick, I think he's been sensational when he's played. And I don't know how many snaps he'll get, now that Pierre-Paul is back and obviously Barrett. But Tryon, when he played, they moved him around. He played DN. They stood him up. He was a joker. He was a dominant player. So they are really, really good up front. Now, this is a team that doesn't play a ton of cover 1. They actually play more 2-man than they do cover 1. But they do play a ton of cover 3. So, it's, and again, we spoke about it just a little bit ago. They play nickel. They don't play dime. So the big question, too, is Antoine Winfield, because he's a very good safety. So if he's out, it's Mike Edwards, who I always liked when he came out of Kentucky, and he's been a pretty solid player, and it's Whitehead. So, I mean, Winfield's a very, very good player, but I wouldn't call that a weakness. The big question for them is at corner.
Yep.
Sherman is playing a left corner. Dean will be at right corner because Davis is on IR.
Yep.
And Cockrell is not really a slot corner, so that could be viewed as a weakness in their coverage.
Yeah, that's who played in the nickel for them. Sean Murphy Bunting on injured reserve. For him later, a few weeks from now. Carlton Davis, they announced that it's not going to need surgery, so they're expecting him back later this year. But obviously, will not be a go for this game. A lot more zone. You mentioned that they play a lot of cover 3, but they definitely played a little bit more cover 2 as well in this one against Miami. Obviously, when you're down a lot of corners, you'll see usually, especially if you got a lot of vets going in there, you're typically going to play a little bit more zone. We'll see if that holds true.
And I believe that they'll play. They'll blitz, no question, selectively, but I think there'll be a lot of 4-man rush. I think they'll try to keep eyes on Hurts because I think the feeling will be that they can at least close down the pocket with their down 4. Because it's not always about sacks. It's about speeding up the quarterback. And I think they would like to keep eyes on Hurts. So I think you'll see zone more so than you'll see man in this game just to get those eyes on Hurts and prevent him from making those big plays and feel that, hey, if he can be precise from the pocket, then more power to him. They'll give him all the credit in the world. But I think that's what they're going to try to make Jalen Hurts be in this game, precise from the pocket.
Sure. And just looking at from a personnel standpoint up front, you talk about Joe Tryon. I think Eagles fans are aware of what Jason Pierre-Paul can be. Shaq Barrett, kind of a short, squatty rusher, but really, really dynamic athletically and has gotten so much better with his hands over the course of his career. Especially in that scheme, he'll get moved around and they'll do different things with him. So he can be so effective. But I want to ask you about Vita Vea, former top 10, top 15 pick coming out of Washington. This is an immensely powerful human being, and with
light feet, by the way.
Yes,
he does not play like a big plodding guy.
No, and I wanted to bring that up because watching this game that the Eagles just played against Carolina, I thought Derek Brown looked like maybe the best player on the field. Jack had a lot of issues with him, and so Vita Vea that kind of presents a similar challenge, more so just because he's a little bit more experienced.
Well, it's a great point you made because Derek Brown had a number of really good snaps. Really good snaps. Again, because he's another guy that's country strong with light feet. In some ways, very much like Vita Vea. Yeah. And Sue. Don't forget Sue. Sue can still play. That's a really interesting matchup. The interior of the Eagles O-line versus Vea and Sue. And we'll see how that plays out, but that'll be really, really an interesting matchup because Driscoll's going to play inside again, I imagine. And obviously Kelsey's a very good player, but Kelsey is not, even when he's at his best, is not what you'd call a power player. So that's a great point you're making. And that's why I think while they will selectively blitz, and I could be dead wrong. Todd Bowles is a lot smarter than I am, but I don't know if this will be a super high percentage blitz game. It'll be selective, but I don't think it'll be all out.
Right. Yeah. And Devin White, if they do blitz a lot, a guy that's very active in their pressure scheme.
Yes, he is. And one thing he's very good at, by the way, when they do play man, is if you feel you need to use your back to help in protection, he's a really good green dogger. If he's responsible for the back, if the back stays in, he goes and he gets there.
No, he's a really, really dynamic player and just a good fit for that scheme because of the things that you mentioned. Look, the injuries at corner, that's going to kind of limit them, but they're going to be that you're going to face a level of pressure. What that looks like you said, is it going to be as heavy as normal? We'll see. But you're going to get some kind of pressure here from Todd Bowles in this game, just like you're going to get quality quarterback play from the guy on the other side. Yeah,
we can probably say he's pretty good, and I don't know what else to really say. I think we're good there.
Greg, just like even Wada, he was dealing on Sunday. He's so fun to watch. He's so.
Every time I watch him, and it's easy to say, Fran, that he's the greatest of all time. Okay, we know Tom Brady's great. Okay, so every time I watch Tom Brady, I think to myself, all these people who say you cannot play quarterback in the NFL now unless you run around. And then I think of Tom Brady. And like I said, then people say, you can't talk about Tom Brady. He's great. Well, it's the process of being great. It's not just because he's great.
Right.
Why can Tom Brady play quarterback without running around? You have to have an answer for that question. You can't just toss it aside and say, he's great. That's the answer. That's not the answer.
Yep.
It's the process. It's the total understanding of everything that's going on the field, and then the repetitive mechanics. He throws the ball the same way every time. That's another thing that gets me is now, you got to be able to throw from multiple platforms. You got to throw it underhand. You got to throw it between your legs. You got to do this. Tom Brady looks the same every time he throws the ball.
Yep. Yeah. And the other thing too, I was talking about this with Ben as we were studying the Bucs. This is not an offense that you would deem as quarterback friendly. When you arrive, you look at the way that they play, whether it's, and look, of course they incorporate pre-snap motion and changing up the personnel groupings and play.
Yes.
Of course they do, but the throws that Tom Brady is asked to make in that offense are not what you would deem as, that's a throw that most quarterbacks in the league can make. And he does it repeatedly at a high level. And it's just,
in fact, you make a great point because you could argue that the offense he was in New England was kind of cleaner in that regard, for presenting those throws. Now in Bruce Arians' offense, and while there's a mix of what Brady likes and what Arians, there's the Arians factor here as well, where there's more downfield throws. He's actually making on a weekly basis what would be viewed as more difficult throws now than he did much of his Patriots career, with the exception of the years he had Randy Moss, when Josh McDaniels clearly added in the vertical pass game because Randy Moss was as good a vertical receiver as we've ever seen in the league. But he's making a lot of those vertical throws, and you know what? He's making them.
He's making them. No question. And he's making them when connecting with the best receiving core in the league. I mean, you look at Mike Evans, you got Chris Godwin, you got Antonio Brown. Obviously, you get into the tight ends, but even the young pieces that they've got behind those three guys, whether it's Tyler Johnson, who ran some ridiculous routes against Miami, Jalen Darden has been a healthy and active. He was a guy you and I both liked as a rookie coming into the league this year. He's not even playing, but Jaden Mickens is a nice role player for them. They incorporate all three of the tight ends. Gronkowski, obviously extremely productive before his injury. Bruce Arians saying on Monday that it'll be very, very close for him to be able to play on Thursday. So something to keep an eye on here. But OJ Howard, Cameron Brate, all the backs involved. I mean, they get everybody involved.
The bottom line point is they can play out of any personnel package and be effective. This particular game was an 11 personnel game. Now, again, that may have been because of Gronk. It may have been because of the nature of the opponent. We'll never know the specific answer to that, but Brady was unbelievable out of 11 personnel. I mean, and actually this season, 73% of his pass attempts have come out of 11 personnel. So, but again, it doesn't matter. It's just the efficiency with which he plays, and he just knows so much. I mean, you can tell that he just knows before the snap of the ball where he's going. And the one other point I wanted to make, because I know this has been big, not in Philly, but just kind of in the social media world and in the fantasy world, about Leonard Fournette. The reason Leonard Fournette plays is two reasons. He's an excellent receiver, and he's really good in pass protection. Yeah. And if you watch this week, which you did, Baker had a sack on Brady, and that resulted from Baker driving back Gio Bernard, not Fournette, right into the pocket. Yep. Fournette, this team is never. I know 2 weeks ago Fournette ended up with 21 carries. This week he had 12. He's not the driving force of the offense, obviously, and it depends on the game. If by chance, and we hope this doesn't happen, but if by chance, the Eagles are down 24-3 in the second quarter, Fournette may get 20 carries. But they don't build their offense around Fournette. But he's a really good receiver, and he is a good pass protector. And you will play in the backfield for Tom Brady if you can pass protect.
No doubt. And real quickly, just to talk about the skill sets. I mean, Mike Evans, Godwin, and Brown, really complementary. I mean, Evans, obviously, he's an alien in terms of the way he's built and the way that he moves, just such a vertical dimension to the offense. Antonio Brown, still really, really sharp, so quick in and out, dynamic after the catch. We saw the long catch and run for a touchdown in the game. And then Godwin kind of playing that power slot role, is that big body in the middle of the field. He can work at all three levels, is often used in motion. Just a really interesting complementary set of pieces.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of nailed it. I don't have a ton to add. So it'll be really interesting how the Eagles decide to play. We know they're not a man team. They're not going to play man this week. They can't match up. Yeah. The question becomes, does Slay, as he did this week, versus Moore, does he at least line up over Evans? I don't know. I mean, this is going to be a heavy zone week because they just can't match up at all, because Maddox cannot match up to Godwin. As much as you and I both like Maddox and the fact that he's tough, he's feisty, he's competitive, same with Steven Nelson, all those good things, they just can't match up. So this will be a heavy zone week. The issue you face, and this is where the rubber could meet the road here, is I think the Bucs O-line is pretty darn good. And the Eagles D-line is going to have to really be good in this game. They're going to have to try to speed Brady up. Because if they don't speed Brady up in this game, and again, we're just talking ball here. I'm not trying to be pessimistic, optimistic, whatever. But if you don't speed Brady up, it's really tough to match up to this passing game.
And that's why I wanted to wrap it up with that, was just talking about the offensive line. You have Donovan Smith at left tackle, Ali Marpet at left guard, Ryan Jensen, one of the best centers in football on the inside, Alex Kappa at right guard, Tristan Wirfs at right tackle. It's a group from left to right. Donovan Smith, you might not say one of the top 10 left tackles in football, but he's a good player and a reliable starter. And I think you would say that about a handful of these guys up front for the Bucs.
Without quite, and don't forget, Brady makes these guys better too, the way in which he plays.
Yeah, the offensive.
You know where he's going to be, and the ball comes out.
Yep.
So, I mean, we can debate where guys rank. I mean, I think Wirfs is a really good right tackle. Jensen is the kind of guy that if he's on your team, you love him. If he's not on your team, you hate him. He's that kind of player.
And most people, I think, that are that focus in on O-line and D-line, will say they were easily one of the top 5-6 centers in the league, easy.
Without question. And I think Marpet, again, I don't fancy myself a guru, but I think people who know, the Brandon Thorns, the Duke Manyweathers of the world would say that Marpet's a pretty good player too.
Yep, no doubt. No, it's a really good group, and that will be a heavyweight fight for certain when you look at their O-line against the Eagles' defensive front. We'll be talking about it next week right here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Greg, thanks so much for joining us once again, and we will talk to you next week.
All right, Fran. Look forward to it.
The Philadelphia Eagles, a new era, introduced the Fly Collection, an elevated, boldly branded apparel capsule with streetwear appeal that's different from your standard Eagles fan gear. The collection sees bold new graphic expressions of the Eagles brand on apparel essentials like hoodies, t-shirts, jackets, and headwear. The designs are kept simple, mixing fresh, modern branding alongside bold punches of color, available exclusively at all Philadelphia Eagles Pro Shop locations and the team's official online store. Learn more and view the entire capsule at philadelphiaeagles.com/fly.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Great stuff from Greg, who you can follow on Twitter, just like I do, at Greg Cosell. And while you're at it, I'm at Eagles XOs. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's Knows content that we produce here with Eagles Entertainment. You know how much I appreciate everybody that promotes this podcast on all forms of social media. That is one way to support the show. But the best way is to go on to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, or even leave us a comment. I wanted to give a shout out today to someone who did exactly that. Right him, longtime listener, left a 5-star review saying, Fran, I love the new focused aspect added to the podcast this year. It really brings an inside perspective to the other teams. Question, as I watch Jalen Hurts play, the comparison I see with him is Dak Prescott. How does Jalen Hurts compare to him coming out of college and in the rookie season? So, right him, I think that's a great question. And I think when you look at that, and that's kind of what you're expecting, right? I mean, Dak Prescott was a 4th-round pick when he was coming out of Mississippi State. Greg and I have talked about this on the show before. Dak was far from a finished product when he came out of college, and his accuracy issues were a big problem, and one of the reasons why he fell to the 3rd day of the draft. He had all of the intangibles, so everybody rallied around him, and obviously, big kid, strong arm, he was athletic, but just the accuracy and consistency from the pocket, that was the question. Now, what Jalen Hurts is facing early in his career versus the situation that Dak Prescott stepped in, a little bit different, right? Obviously, they had just taken Ezekiel Elliott in the 1st round, top 5. They were going to run the offense through him, through the run game. And even still watching him this year, right, that is their game plan. They're going to run the football 30 times a game, and Dak Prescott, not necessarily a compliment, but he's going to build off of that. And I think that that's kind of the situation he was dropped into. That's not common in today's NFL, right? So it's a little bit different when you look at their career development and what you're looking to see from them. But yeah, I mean, that's the arc that you're hoping for. And Dak Prescott, not necessarily the game changer, the catalyst of that offense until you saw him get into year 3, year 4. So we'll see if that's what happens here with Jalen Hurts, but you want to continue to see him making some strides in the areas where, there were perceived weaknesses of his coming into the NFL. Just get a little bit better in those areas. It's not going to be game after game, week after week. You're going to have some ups and downs, but I think continuing big picture to build that faith from the organization, say, yeah, I can be this guy. I can be the franchise quarterback moving forward for this team. That's what the Eagles are hoping to see here over the next few months. Good question there, though, from Will. And obviously that is a comparison a lot of people will continue to make, certainly watching this NFC East. So great stuff there from Will. Thank you to him, and thank you to all of you out there for your continued support of this show and all the rest of our podcasts here with Eagles Entertainment. That being said, I think that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the NovaCare Complex, I'm Fran Duffy. We will talk to you later this week.